Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. With the world sheltered in place and artists eager to share their talents online and generate much needed revenue, today's Ask an Expert webinar is focused on the legal landscape of live streaming. This session is part of an informative series being presented by the Alliance of Performing Arts Conferences. And this leadership group is made up of regional, national, and international performing arts conferences who meet annually to discuss industry trends, identify common advocacy issues, and address areas for improvement in the field. Members include Arts Midwest, Arts Northwest, ArtsReady, APAP, the Association of Performing Arts Professionals, Folk Alliance International, NAPAMA, the North American Performing Arts Managers and Agents, the North Carolina Presenters Consortium, IPAY, the International Performing Arts for Youth, South Arts, and WA, the Western Arts Alliance. In addition to the services and support that each of our respective organizations provide on an ongoing basis for our direct membership and communities, the APAC cohort has been working closely together since March to provide timely and up-to-date content related to the COVID-19 crisis, as well as ideas, solutions, and resources for our various constituencies. And today's webinar is one such offering. At this time, I'd like to introduce today's moderator, Matthew Covey, who is the Executive Director of Tamizdat, a New York-based nonprofit that facilitates and advocates for the international cultural mobility and exchange. Welcome and thank you, Matthew.
Thanks, Angus. And thank you all for joining us today. By the number of people that are currently in the room, I think we're at over 500 people. Obviously, this is an issue that has become timely and urgent for people throughout our community. And to help us through these topics, which seemed kind of interesting and important a little while ago and now seem existential to many of our organizations, we're really lucky to have with us Jessi Olsen, Director of Growth at Big Room, which is a live concert streaming platform and software company, and Sachedina, who's the VP of General Counsel and Business Affairs at JioSaavn, which is an Indian digital music streaming service. Jessi and Ali and I spent a fair amount of time going through the reams of questions that we received in advance of this webinar and try to figure out the best way to break down those questions in a way that is going to make the most sense and going to have the most logical flow to it. And in true law school fashion, we decided to kind of base the conversation around a couple of hypothetical situations and use that as a framework to explore a lot of the issues that came in the questions. The two hypothetical situations that we're going to be looking at basically are, the first is from the point of view of a venue that's wanting to do streaming. What are the issues that they're going to face? And the second is from the point of view of an artist who's wanting to do streaming. What are the issues that they're going to face? We're going to try and touch on issues surrounding rights, royalties, monetization, and a host of other topics that are arcane but crucial now. I think also in a lawyerly fashion, I want to just emphasize that we're giving you general guidance that you can build your understanding around, but many of you, if not all of you in the audience, are going to have specific, what we would say is case-specific situations that are going to have variations and themes on these themes, and that if you find yourself getting into the weeds, it's always best to turn to somebody or an expert in the field, an attorney or somebody who really knows what they're talking about, to get advice, because obviously there's a lot at stake with a lot of decisions that relate to these issues. So we're going to do this in a kind of free-form way. Ali is going to respond to some of the initial questions, and Jessi is going to be here to expand those ideas in terms of real practice and and that way we can see what we can learn from what both of them are seeing in the field right now. So I want to start with a very basic question. If you're a venue or a presenter, promoter, if you're if you're an arts organization that is now in a situation where you can't be doing live performances anymore and you're turning to the internet as a way to try to remain connected with your audiences, connected with your artists, and hopefully drive visibility and also maybe even money, what are the options and what are the concerns that you should be aware of as you do this? So I think let's start, Ali. If you're a venue and you want to do live streaming, what does the venue need to do to make sure that their content is protected? What do they need to do to make sure that they're covering reporting rights, royalty issues, and what do we need to know in terms of what do they have to do that's different than they would normally do for a live performance?
Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you, Matthew. Thank you, everyone. It's great to be here, albeit ideally working under better circumstances, but yeah, this is really important and timely as a subject. So let's look at it from a case study point of view. A venue wants to stream, a venue's basically been shut down because of the virus. Their summer schedule has been shelved. But there are artists that were booked. There are artists that were, that you have a good relationship with, and you want to perhaps do a live stream through your venue, and the artist is of course at home. So what would you go? How would you go about it? First and foremost, I would create a checklist, and then the checklist, it's about getting your clearances in place. And by clearances, they fall into a number of buckets. One, of course, is related to the music, and the other is related to the actual performance. And then, of course, there's the technical side of it. Let's start with the music. So often venues have a PRO license, an ASCAP BMI CSAC live performance license that covers any performance of any underlying music works that happen at the venue in a normal live setting. That license does not apply to live streaming. So if you want to live stream, you would have to get a separate, completely different license with ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC. Those licenses are solely for live performances. So that's number one. And that takes care of, again, while it might be seemingly it's like just another expense, a lot of work to get those licenses. As we will show you later on, there are actually ways of going about it in a rather turnkey and easy manner. Second, we'd move on to the performance. Well, so we've addressed, as we all know, music is comprised of two sets of rights. You have your publishing, your compositions, and then your master rights. So with your PRO license, your ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC license, you're addressing your public performance license, your publishing license. With regards to live streaming, then the question is, there's the master, the actual recording, the sound recording copyright. Generally, live streaming, if it's a one-off live stream, it doesn't invoke the need for a sound recording license, at least not in the United States. However, if you decide to restream it, if you decide to archive it, or if you're using an archive recording, that's another clearance that you would need to check off. So that's music on one side. And again, I realize this is very broad in general. We'll get into the weeds a little bit later on. Then there's a question of, all right, the actual performance. So if you have an artistic engagement agreement, of course, everything is on hold because of the pandemic, check your agreement. There may be a clause in there, some people do, that allow for live streaming in some form or another. Alternatively, reach out to the artist, reach out to their manager. If the artist is unsigned and is not on a label and there's a certain positive, great relationship, and again, we're all sort of in this together, so I think everyone appreciates the challenges we're currently existing in. They may be willing to do a live stream through your venue. And if they are signed to a record label, you would need to get clearances not just from the artists, but you would also need to go to the label, because a label has a certain vested interest in the likeness and image rights. But it's not just the artists. Let's say you're a dance troupe, it's a theater piece, or involves an orchestra. You would need to get the approvals to live stream, not just, you know, the key performers, but also the dancers, the side artists. So, and again, if you're talking to the artist, you're talking to the manager, they will generally help you get those clearances. It's not that hard. Now, there may be a financial element to it. There may be, you know, sharing whatever's donated. There are a variety of iterations, considerations. Maybe they may do it for free. But again, that's a contractual discussion and arrangement that you and the artist will have. So in terms of, that's your sort of immediate two, you know, bucket list that you need to check off of. And then of course is the technical side. But I'll hand it back to you, Matt, if you want, or Jessi, if you'd like to weigh in on some of the other, those are the right side, but there's obviously a number of other concerns as well.
So let's say I've got a venue and we're dark, and I was planning to have singer-songwriter performing next Thursday, and we've worked with them a million times, and I contact them and say, hey, look, can't do the show, I want to do a stream. And they're like, that sounds great. I've got my laptop, I can do a video, perfect, let me tune up. You need to, at that point, the venue who's doing the stream, presumably through their venue website or through some platform, I'm going to have to, before we hit play and hit go live, I need to talk to, I need to talk to the artist and say, hey, are you signed, right? And if they say yes, then I probably need to contact their label or have them contact their label. Jessi, when you work with artists, with the venues that you guys work with, do you find that those agreements that between the venue and the artist already include wording to address streaming, or is that something when you go into work with a venue that you've got to start from scratch and come up with new agreements with your artists?
It really depends from venue to venue. Some venues that first of all, what Big Room does is we have hardware and software that we install in venues, and we also have a mobile kit that artists and venues can use from anywhere to stream multi-camera automated shoots from either home or from a studio. But before we started the kind of mobile version of what we do, when I was working with venues directly, we encourage them to build into their contract language however they want to use the footage in the future. So that usually looks like making sure that in the contract it says that everyone can use the footage for marketing purposes. So that way, when you get into situations like this, where, you know, what a lot of folks really want to do right now is just to have live streams going, not necessarily to make money, but to remind the world that the live music industry is still here and we will continue to be here and we're not going anywhere. So I think what's really important is to, far in advance, have that language in place. But if that's not possible, it's usually just about quickly going back to your artists and their reps and talking about what can be negotiated.
Okay, so I've got this contract for the show that was supposed to happen next Thursday. The first thing to do is go back to that contract and see if we've talked about streaming. And turns out we didn't even think about this, so that's not there. So I need to go to the artist and say, look, I want to do this stream with you, but we're going to have to add wording into our contract to talk about the live streaming context. Where would I go to find? I've got a boilerplate and I've used this for years. I've never thought, I haven't read it since, you know, probably the Carter administration. So now I'm looking at it again and I'm trying to figure out, like, what do I add that has to do with streaming? Where do I find that language? Is that something I can just pull down off the internet somewhere? Or do I need to hire a lawyer? Do I need to, like, where do I get that language? Either of
Do
you.
you want to try it, or do you try?
Oh, you go for it.
Well, obviously the safest way would be to go to an entertainment lawyer or a music lawyer who has some experience to create that. It doesn't have to be particularly complex or complicated. We're talking about, it has to reflect what you want to do with the live stream. If it's your intention is to simply, to put it out on a platform, send it, and as Jessi said, sort of bring awareness to the fact that, hey, we, the venue, are here, we'll be back. Here's just some of the great artists that are coming in October, November, and it's sort of a preview of good things to come. That's one thing. It's certainly easier to manage. But if you want to do something more with it, like if there's a monetization, you want to, and we'll talk about this as well, about generating donations, or archiving it and then reselling it as a, as a standalone recording. It gets a little bit more complicated, but again, it doesn't have to be particularly onerous if you have certain checks in place.
So let's say we're not planning to try and monetize, just to keep it simple for the start, we're not trying to monetize this. We're not planning to archive it. We're not planning to rebroadcast it later. I'm just going to try to slip into something. I'm going to do a revision of that contract, and it just says, hey, by signing this, Mr. Artist, you're allowing me to do a live stream of this. And the artist says, sure, that's fine. Put it in the contract, we sign it. Now do I need to contact ASCAP, BMI, or CSAC? Or is that something that I can trust that the artist is going to talk about with their label and they'll take care of it?
Well, a couple of things. Let's assume that the artist is not signed.
Okay.
Then obviously there's no one else you need to contact, or at least from the sound recording side or getting the artist clearance side.
Okay.
Let's say the artist is signed. It would behoove you, it would be extremely important for you to reach out or have the artist reach out to the label. Now, again, labels in the current day and circumstances, they understand the need to, to keep awareness and that everyone's hurting. The question that often arises, like, why do I need to contact the label? I mean, what kind of, is this, is this indentured servitude? What's up? What's going on? Sure. And well, think about it, from a label has invested, whether big or small, they've invested resources, capital into the artist. They've signed them to an exclusive recording agreement. This recording agreement says that we're going to put out 1 or 2 albums or songs over a period of X number of years. If there is another recording of all the artist's songs, even if it's live in high definition and it's out there in the ether, like on YouTube, on Twitch, wherever it may be, and the platforms, again, we'll talk about later on, essentially there's a potential for diluting or cannibalizing the value of their investment. So you have to look at it from the perspective of the kind of investment. It's not just being difficult. It's about that investment that they have made. And truth be told, the artist puts enough pressure, more likely than not, they'll permit it. And that's why there's a certain element of control. Now, if the artist isn't signed, you're good. That certainly simplifies the process.
So, okay, I get that. I guess the part that I think people might not understand, though, is that if there is a license that I need to get from an ASCAP or a BMI or a CSAC,
right,
is that something that I need to, I don't know,
well,
call the switchboard?
It depends on your threshold for pain. It really depends on how, you have a lot of money and time to go out and secure, because again, in order to live stream, you need a public performance. At the very core basic thing that you need is a public performance license that allows you to stream the underlying works, the compositions, the publishing, right? And that's different from your venue license. So again, you have a venue license and you're compliant. That's not going to work, unfortunately. You could go to CSAC and ASCAP BMI and actually negotiate for a license if you wanted to do the streaming in-house. You wanted to control it. You have the technology, the ability to do it all in-house. But you could just make your life a lot easier and not recreate the wheel, if you will, by going to one of the existing platforms, again, which we highlighted, some of them being YouTube, Facebook Live, Twitch, that all of whom have existing blanket licenses with ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC for 1, live streaming, and 2, on-demand restreaming. So, for example, if you go to YouTube, is a very easy example. Once you create a branded venue channel on YouTube, and you're streaming some of these live shows, it gets archived, and it's made available again and again and again, on demand. And because of YouTube's very, sort of, it works fairly well, the content ID system, they can identify all the songs that are, all the compositions on there, ensure that the right people are paid. Which brings us to the question of covers, which was a question that we got a lot of.
Sure. Before we get to the covers thing, just want to jump in there. So Jessi, in practice, it sounds to me like I'm this venue promoter. I want to do this live stream. I've got this guy who's supposed to be playing on Thursday. So it sounds like what you're saying, Ali, is probably the easiest way to do this. If they're signed, talk to the label, make sure that's cool. If they're not signed, I don't need to talk to the label. As long as I'm just using an existing major platform, I'm kind of done. What are the...
Not totally,
but yeah. What?
Done from that. Not completely done, but yes, done in terms of that one line.
Not completely done. However, what are the... Is virtually everything being done? Is virtually all the live streaming that people are contemplating right now, is it happening through these major platforms, or are there people out there who are doing this? I mean, you referred to it as reinventing the wheel, Ali. Obviously, nobody wants to do that in this time. We all have plenty to do without reinventing wheels. But is that something that there are major limitations to using an existing platform? Or is that just a kind of a given at this point?
There's a pretty big mix. I mean, if anyone has been on Instagram in the last couple weeks, at any given moment, I've get, dozens and dozens of like, going live now notifications. So everyone's experimenting, it seems like, from individual artists to big venues. The major platforms like Facebook, YouTube, Instagram are where you've already built your audience. So reinventing and creating a whole, website and space for your live stream to be hosted is a little counterintuitive if your main goal is to say, hey, existing audience that we already have worked to build and can already contact, here's our live stream. That said, lots of folks are experimenting. And this is another thing that we were going to talk about later, but there's, I've started to see venues and groups of cohorts of producers get together and create kind of like digital venues that are sponsored by brands, that are their own websites. Thinking about like Baby TV, which is the Baby's All Right venue, has their own branded space. And the actual video hosting is done by, most likely by one of the bigger platforms like Vimeo or YouTube. But it gives you a chance to kind of wrap your own brand around it and have a little more control that way. But certainly if you're a venue that is like just starting out into live streaming, focus your attention on making sure that actual content looks and sounds really good before jumping into creating your own digital venue. The platforms already exist and are working just fine. So that's really the main thing. Getting away from having artists just use their phones to stream is great.
Right. So just if you don't mind me asking, insofar as we talk about venues, but artists, I mean, are they can also avail themselves of these same platforms, and they should also, I mean, how would you recommend artists go about the exact same thing? I want to stream, I want to get the word out. Is it the same thing basically?
Yeah, I mean, for artists,
platform or...
For artists, it's about, it kind of depends. For artists, it's way easier to monetize on some platforms than it is on others. So that's one thing. If it's really important for you to be able to have a conversation with your audience while you're performing, I'm thinking a lot about DJs who want to be able to take requests and interact with their audience. There's certain platforms that do that better than others. And there's certainly, you also want to keep in mind what, especially if you're an artist that's quarantined, what gear do you have in wherever you're quarantined, and how can you use that to make yourself sound the best? Venues have a bit of a leg up in a lot of cases when it comes to having more technical know-how. And so I think it's a little bit easier for venues to say, you know, our sound guy or gal is able to help us set up, you know, audio versus an artist, you know, making a DIY home studio.
Sure.
But yeah, it's very similar. You just really have to think about what your goals are for live streaming and find a platform that works for that.
Okay, so I think I'm starting to figure out how I'm going to do this thing next Thursday. This makes sense. It sounds like I'm going to use one of the major platforms because that's obviously a whole lot simpler. And I'm going to assume that as long as I've talked to the label and the contract issues regarding, you know, who gets paid and that I have permission, that's taken care of because I talked to the label, or if in the absence of label, I talked to the artist. Great. I know that my major platform is going to handle reporting. They're going to handle the rights, and they're going to handle royalty issues for this performance. So I'm not going to worry about that. Is that right? Sort of. So we're good up until I'm talking to the artist and like, this is great. And the artist says, yeah, I'm so psyched about this. I've decided that I'm going to really do this as a tribute show. And so I'm primarily going to be playing covers of a bunch of artists that have really influenced me, mostly artists who have dealt with isolation issues. And so it's going to be primarily a cover show. That's cool, right? What happens then? Is it my job to deal with that, or is YouTube going to handle the right issues? I'm doing covers.
A couple of things. One, assuming we're talking about the US context, your license, once you upload it onto, let's say, YouTube, and you're streaming through YouTube, whether it's a cover or not, or it's original, that part of the equation. So again, a cover is a re-recording of a composition. So, you know, if Matthew decides to do a cover of a Rage Against the Machine track, why not? He would, and he streams it. YouTube's content ID system would ensure that Rage, the writers, Tom Morello, etc., they would get paid what they're entitled to get paid for the stream. The issue then arises. Okay, it's a one-time stream, or it's an on-demand stream. If you take that cover and then you decide, you know what, a lot of people really got into this cover, I'm going to put it out as a, as a standalone. It invokes a separate license. Again, it's a cover, it's a compulsory license in the United States, it's the mechanical license. But again, just be wary of, the fact that even though it's a cover, and you're allowed to do covers, and yes, you can live stream them, there are certain limitations on when you go off a platform, if you do it off of YouTube, one. And there are limitations on how it necessarily, in other territories, like for example, in India, where I do a fair amount of work, covers, there's no compulsory licenses. So in the US, there's thousands of bad covers of, songs available on Spotify, right? Good and bad, they're all so many available. But in India, you need to get affirmative permission from the rights owner, and they can say no, and they can dictate terms. So it'd be a bit mindful in case there is a global audience here. But generally, yes, fine.
So I don't need to call Rage Against the Machine before I do my cover. So that's
not
easy.
In the United States, or not. Yeah, well, you wouldn't call Rage as much as you would call the publisher, the people who own the rights.
Got it. But it's good to know though that I might do that, and it goes up on YouTube, and it's broadcast here in the States and in any other country that has a compulsory license. But if I tell my fans in India, hey, check out this Rage cover I just did on my accordion, they're going to look and they're going to say like, it doesn't play in my region. Is that what's going to happen?
No, we're talking about India. If you do a cover of an Indian composition.
Oh, okay.
So if you do, if you do a cover of an old Kishore Kumar track, or or Artie Burman song, that. So it has to be. It's about where that particular work is classified.
So they're going to go to the link that I send them, and the link is going to come up, and YouTube's going to say this content not available in this region.
Yes, and YouTube it'll match it and say, hey, these guys, they need to be paid.
Okay.
Universal Music Publishing needs to be paid. Yeah.
That's cool. That makes it a whole lot simpler.
So if you want to do, I think there was a great hypo, a reggae cover of Stairway to Heaven.
Right.
But I'd love to hear it, and go for it.
Okay.
I'm really excited for this accordion Rage Against the Machine set.
And that too.
I'll send you the link later. I'm working on it. It hasn't quite mastered yet. So this is all great, but I'm concerned about the idea that, well, what I really want to do is I'm going to take this recording we do next week, covers and all, and I want to archive that. And I want to be able to make that something that we can continue to broadcast. It sounds like as long as I'm using a major platform, that's more a contractual issue between myself and the artist and their label than it is a question of trying to make sure that I'm reporting something to BMI or ASCAP or something like that, right?
It definitely, so archive recordings, so the difference, think about it, archive recording, it's almost the same as a new album. It really is. It's a fixed recording that you recorded like 6 years ago, or you want to stream it. So look at it from a label's point of view, they see it as an entire new body of recordings out there in the marketplace. Okay. So yes, one, it's absolutely essential that you get both the artist's approval, and if they're signed to a label, the latest label's approval. And if you're going to stream it, and if you use, again, one of the platforms that has existing licenses, you'll have all the coverage you necessarily need. Now, again, because you're dealing with a newly recorded sound recording, a new master recording of those live performances, again, the labels, whoever has those exclusive rights, it's absolutely essential that you get approvals from them.
Right.
And then maybe find out a revenue share, maybe they're right, but it is quite important.
So Jessi, this brings us back to the conversation we were having yesterday, which is like, so the guy who's going to be playing on Thursday, he comes back to me now and he says, well, I have this friend of mine and she's a DJ, and I'd really like her to open her set with like a 20-minute DJ set of a bunch of music that she really, like, she knows real bangers, and it's going to make everybody really get into my set. That's okay, right? So what happens then? Because that's not the artist who I planned on performing. It's a DJ coming in who's going to be playing a bunch of other people's music. Does that totally change the whole scenario?
DJs and recorded music do change the scenario.
I was hoping that wouldn't happen.
Yeah. And those will get certain platforms, especially if we're talking about the major platforms, will mute or just completely boot you off if there's too many, if they catch too many recorded songs in a row.
Okay.
We've seen this even at Big Room before, in the days of going to venues. The pre-show music that is just playing in the house, that is being captured by the live stream, gets muted on Facebook. So I've seen DJs do a lot of different things to try and work around these issues. Mostly it looks like venue hopping, so hopping from platform to platform.
But that's not legal, right? It might work, but it's not a great idea.
It might work, but it's not the greatest way to do it.
Got it. Okay. Now I remember somebody asked, one of the questions was an artist saying that they were doing their own live stream of their own music, which is recorded and released on their label, and they're getting booted off because the algorithms are identifying, presumably the algorithms are identifying that their own song already exists online, and so YouTube is shutting them down when they're performing it live. Is that a thing that happens? Is that an explanation for why people might get booted off or doing their own, basically covering themselves? Is that a thing that happens, or is that not a real thing?
I mean, it's happened.
Okay. Okay.
I'm not exactly sure how to work around that.
Okay.
I defer to lawyers there.
Okay.
The content ID system that YouTube has is not perfect.
Okay.
And so you will have conflicting claims, if you will. It's happened before, but I do want to go back to DJ sets and just emphasize, because it's such a it's so easy to do and it sounds so good. I mean, just plug into your mixer and you have a full set and you can drop anywhere, and how of critical importance it is for everyone to understand that a live stream is performing live. You're performing compositions live, right? Whether it be cover or your own original works, it's a live performance. A DJ set is using pre-recorded music mixed together, whether it be vinyl or you're using, digital files. And again, because you're using pre-recorded music, you're invoking the need to clear master rights, sound recording rights, and those are generally owned by the label. Now, it begs the question, well, if you go on YouTube, Boiler Room, which is a huge platform, has tons and tons and tons of archived, DJ sets that go back, right? That's probably one of two things, and I don't know the exact answer. One of two things could have happened. One, Boiler Room could have entered into a license for that, or YouTube has a blanket license with the label, which is probably more likely. So they have a license with CSAC, ASCAP, EMI for the publishing side, and they have certain, licenses with the labels for the sound recording side. And in fact, if you look through the credits, you'll see that they're crediting license from Universal. I mean, you got license from them. So you'll see the set list identifies. So DJ sets are, they're easy. They're a lot of fun. They draw a lot of people, but they are highly problematic. Yeah.
Got it. So, so for this live stream I'm doing next Thursday, the artist just called me up and said, wait a minute, hang on. So I had a $400 guarantee for this gig. Am I still going to get paid? And I realized I hadn't thought of that. So I'm starting to think about, and the artist says, well, why don't you just, I don't know, do a banner or something so you get money for the live stream that we're doing, and then we can make money, and then you can give me my $400. And I realized that I have no idea how to do that. Can you guys talk about, and maybe Jessi, this would be a place for you to start. You want to talk about monetization and what kinds of ways we're seeing monetization? And Ali, obviously jump in wherever you feel like it. What kinds of monetization are out there? What that means in terms of the arrangement I have to make with the artist, and what technologically do I need to do to make that viable?
Sure. Monetization is, from what I can see, the fastest moving thing in the live stream world right now. And a lot of what we're seeing is ways to do like tip jar style donations. And that is available on a lot of the major platforms. On some of them, like Twitch, you have to become like a super user and have a certain amount of followers to be able to use that functionality. But then there's also platforms where you can subscribe. There's platforms that treat live streams like a ticketed event, like things like Stage It, and this is something that Big Room is also working on. There's also ticketing companies are now starting to figure out, Eventbrite has been going around and working on ways to do ticketing for live stream events. I think a big thing that we're talking to a lot of venues about, especially, is that there isn't like a standard ticket price for a live stream right now. And it's putting a $sign on a ticket for a live stream show is a very it's kind of a thing you have to experiment with and see what your audience is willing to do.
Sure.
And it's also an opportunity to mimic the way ticketing works at your venue. If you are a venue that does tip jar donations, you can do that, and there's a lot of options for you digitally. If you're a venue that has, you know, $400 seats in your, you know, mezzanine, you might not be able to replicate that successfully online.
So, but this is also
one point. If you don't mind, two things. One, so the streaming service that I work with, JioSaavn, in India, we started a program after the virus came in, and we realized that artists in India were, like here, just cut off from their primary source of revenue, created something called JioSaavn Live Anywhere. And again, home streaming, we tied in with Dolby. So Dolby provided an app that allowed for pretty crystal clear recordings on the phone. And we tied in with a ticketing company in India called Insider.in, where basically Insider would be like a normal event that you'd walk into, and you could purchase as many tickets as you wanted, and you would listen to the 25-minute stream. It's generally original music. It was embedded on Facebook, on our Facebook page, and all the proceeds going to the artist. And so in one artist, I bought, you know, like 10 tickets, you know, just as a donation, you know. And so it's there are definitely, I mean, I haven't seen that here as much, but it's something that has been working for us. I don't know how much money the artists have necessarily generated, but it's something. The other thing is, I know that I do want to highlight the fact that there's a lot of information that we're all sharing with you right now, with the audience. Focal Lines, APAP, my colleagues and I put together a deck, a really comprehensive deck that outlines all these issues and provides additional resources. And I think the good people at Focal Lines will be sharing that with you hopefully by Friday. We're just making sure it's fully compiled and clean and vetted and ready for your consumption. So don't worry if we're speaking too broadly. You know, you'll get that.
Yeah,
that deck will help a lot.
It's remarkably comprehensive. So if we haven't touched on something in this hour, there's a lot more information there that'll be available to you. So in terms of monetization, in terms of this show that I'm doing next Thursday, sounds like the platforms that the platforms that I can use are primarily going to be ones that I'm going to find offered by whatever service it is that I'm using. So if I'm planning to put this up on Facebook Live, that's where I would turn to for monetization, or are there other ways that I might be doing that, generating revenue from the performance that are outside of the platform I'm using? And is it just, if I am using that platform, is that just something that when I go to Facebook Live, I'll be able to like say, oh, and here are my monetization options, I'm going to select those? Is that how it works?
So for something like Facebook Live, it is all, the monetization would be all connected to whoever's hosting it. For any platform, whoever is hosting it is who the funds will funnel down to. And then it's about deciding amongst yourselves between the artists and their reps and the venue, and if there's sponsors, whoever's a stakeholder, it's about deciding ahead of time how that money will be divvied up. There's also ways, you know, I've seen a lot of folks on YouTube and on Facebook and on Instagram putting up links to GoFundMe's or to Cash Apps, Venmo, that kind of thing. That's also a way to, if you just want to not have to deal with a money breakdown. I've seen lots of folks put up a series of YouTube sets with different artists, and during their set you can have, you know, a little scroll down the bottom that's like at Jessi Precious on Cash App, and people can you know, can donate that way.
There.
I'm not on Cash App. I wish I'd thought of this ahead.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Are there best practices yet? I mean, we're talking over the last, you know, month in terms of how, you know, I'm putting the stream together, the artist is doing their performance. How do we talk about who gets, so, and it turns out we do the show and, you know, 400 people donate $1 or put $1 in, or that's what's coming through Facebook Live, or whatever the thing might. So we've got this little pile of money. I know how to deal with tickets when I sell them at the door, and I know what the split's going to be, and I know what my, I know how that works. Is it any different in the streaming context in terms? This is not a legal question. This is just what are people doing? What are we seeing as being appropriate for how the host, the venue, the artist, how we split the revenue that's coming in from these streaming events?
We've seen a lot of different things. I think it really depends on the size and budget of the venue. If you are a small 100 cap venue in a city that's been shut down for a month and a half and still required to pay rent, you may need that money really badly. And I've seen a lot of different models where artists are coming together and saying, we want to do this show for this venue to raise money for this venue because we know that when all of this is done, we need this space to make revenue.
Sure.
I've also seen venues say, our artists that we love and care about are hurting because all their gigs have been canceled, so we're not going to take any cut of this, but here's a link to buy a venue t-shirt if you want to do that. Here's our GoFundMe link if you want to do that, but all of the proceeds from this event are going directly to the artists.
Got it.
It's really, this is a really important time to just really talk to your community openly about what you need financially.
Okay. All right, so that's just a conversation I should have with the artist and talk about, what their needs are and what seems fair in this context. There's no particular model that's accepted in the industry yet. Although Ali seems to have a point.
Well, actually, because I know we don't have that much time, but there was one item on that checklist that we didn't mention. There was the artist performer, the music clearances. There's one other, if you don't mind. One is the final thing is that there has to be a certain level of content moderation and guidelines. So every time you you use YouTube or Twitch, you're agreeing to their terms and conditions, their terms of use, and it behooves you to read them because as much as they provide clearances for music compositions and for you to be able to stream, they also pass some of the buck back onto you in case something falls through the crack. And two, you are warranting to them that this live stream is not going to have offensive content. It's going to not infringe on trademarks that belong to somebody else. So just a couple of key highlights of this. And again, this is all in the presentation, the materials that we'll be sending out to everyone, but just be mindful of infringing on third-party trademarks. So it's one thing if the drummer's wearing a New York Yankees hat. It's a very different thing when the brand has this trademark, or this logo has a very prominent sort of placement within the stream. And
right.
If, for example, because you're a Mets fan, you started burning the Yankees t-shirt, I don't know, something that sort of disparages or puts that logo into a bad light.
Right.
Also being sensitive to cultural, sensitivity. So one example that it's in our presentations that over here we have free speech and burning the flag has been in some instances been protected as a expression of free speech. In India, you burn the flag, you go to jail, and not just the Indian flag, but any flag. So you go to jail for a year. Deface if you sort of manipulate or deface religious imagery, if there's any drug use, if there's any people are smoking joints on stage, whatever, the entire, you need to exercise certain amount of moderation as either a venue or self-moderation as an artist. And certainly as a venue, adding certain language within your agreement, the live streaming agreement with the artist, which you probably already have in your venue and get the live engagement agreement about the kind of permissible behavior that
Sure.
That
I'm going to
it's
really have to rethink.
Sorry.
I'm going to have to rethink my accordion cover of the Rage Against the Machine song because I'm not sure that's going to fly everywhere now. There's some parts of it that might be challenging to that.
Jessi had this.
That's just real quick. There's also there's platforms. If let's say you are either a presenter that presents edgy, let's use that word for lack of a better one, performances with nudity, performances that are overtly sexual, performances that you think maybe Facebook Live and everyone's mom that's on Facebook Live would not be into. There's platforms like OnlyFans, there's platforms that put up a subscription wall that kind of privatizes your stream space that might be better suited for your purposes.
Good to know. Thank you. Just quickly, the other hypo has to do with artists doing this by themselves. As we've developed this conversation, it doesn't sound to me like there's that much difference between me doing this as a venue and the artist saying, actually, you know what, I'm not going to do this through this venue, I'm just going to do this on my own. Are there other considerations that artists need to have if they are choosing to do their own live streaming using a major platform just from their living room, unaffiliated with an existing venue? It's pretty much the same thing, isn't it?
In essence, it is. I mean, the venue, the license that an artist, and to be honest, this is something I would need to get clarification on. But there was a great question. Is like, hey, I know a venue has an ASCAP BMI CSAC license, and for their live performance, and then we'll get one for their live stream. Do I, as an artist, if I'm streaming from home, need one too? My gut reaction, at least my limited understanding, is no, because it's not a commercial entity. However, don't hold me to it. I will have that answer in the materials.
Okay. Along the same lines, one of the questions said, are these rules effectively the same across the different art forms, or is music different from comedy? Is comedy different than theater or dance? Are there any particular forms of art that have to think about this differently?
Well, that's generally no, because when it comes to the use of music. So, but dance, if you're live streaming a dance performance, remember, you're using recorded music. Unless, of course, you have a live orchestra, sort of ballet kind of thing, larger thing, that's amazing. But you're generally using recorded music, so keep that in mind. You do need to get a clearance from whoever owns, in the same way a DJ would. You need to get that clearance.
Got it.
But genre-wise, hip-hop, whether choral music or hip-hop, at some point, a clearance would need to be received. Now, when it comes to sort of traditional music that is in the public domain, again, in the outline as we were preparing it, so definitely need to dig a little deeper as to whether sort of if you're performing, let's say, a traditional choral or operatic piece like Bach, whoever, like, is that necessarily require a public performance license? My understanding is that it does, because so far as the arrangement is concerned, again, that's something I will dig into. I'm not familiar with sort of public domain classical music as much as I am sort of other forms.
I think we're out of time. Thank you guys so much for joining us. This is a wealth of information very quickly. And Teresa, let's lead out.
Well, thank you all for joining this webinar presented by APAC, the Alliance for Performing Arts Conferences. We hope you found the ideas here useful. A huge thank you to our esteemed panelists, Jessi, Olsen, Sachedina, and Matthew Covey. Everyone's clapping at home. Registrants will receive an automated email from us in a few days with a link to the PDF of all the information shared today, plus a transcript and a recording of today's episode. You can also find a handout attached to today's webinar with our future website offerings. Please do join us next week at the same time for APAC's next webinar, Ask an Expert, Tech Tips and Tricks for Successful Live Streaming. And please do take a moment to provide feedback about today's webinar by responding to the brief survey that will appear when it ends. Stay safe and connected, everyone, and we'll see you next time. And thanks again to our panelists. Bye-bye.